David Letterman, at the age of 78, is speaking out about his long-running animosity with Jay Leno, one of the most notorious rivalries in late-night television. Their feud had a profound impact on television, from on-air insults to betrayals behind the scenes. What transpired behind the scenes is now being revealed by Letterman. Help us find out the truth by coming along of the conflict that irrevocably altered the nature of late night. Ending the late-night war after decades, David Letterman had to be on top of his game for a long time. He had to find a way to make his CBS Late Show guests laugh, even when they weren't being funny. On days when he wasn't feeling well, he had to maintain being hilarious. In order to keep his ratings up over the years, he did several things that he didn't really love. Plus, he had a natural talent for comedy and could pull them off every time. He is thinking back on his career now that he is retired. I should know the answer, but I'm not myself anyplace. The issue with the adjunct is this. When I was a performer, he also has a full beard instead of his typical clean-shaven look. By the way, how frequently is this done? The number of times a man walks in and says, "I need to shave my entire face," is ridiculous. While discussing his time at CBS, David Letterman told the New York Times that he doesn't miss late-night television, but he has been thinking back on his time there. Additionally, Letterman admitted that, looking back, he was the one who suggested ramping up the rivalry between himself and fellow late-night host Jay Leno. It was clear to him that the mounting animosity between him and Jay finally got to him, and he caved. It was certainly being fueled by a portion of him. Something seemed odd to him, in his opinion. A personality condition or a character fault could have caused it. It must be strange to look back on a 33-year career in the limelight and not feel any remorse. David Letterman had a watershed moment in his career when, here at WatchMojo.com, we're going to examine David Letterman's career today. Was his never-ending rivalry with Jay Leno. Beginning with Johnny Carson's departure from The Tonight Show and the widespread belief that he would eventually retire, this competition lasted for decades. It was clear that Letterman should play the part. But instead of Jay Leno, NBC picked him. Wow, what a remarkable talent. In my opinion, he resembles a younger Johnny more than nearly anyone else since then. I have no say in the matter. Letterman went so far as to accuse Leno of insecurity during an interview with Oprah Winfrey, and the two continued to trade insults in subsequent interviews and live TV appearances. It was Leno's well-known refusal to appear during one of Letterman's final shows. Their feud has grown legendary at this point, despite the fact that it began with NBC's judgment over The Tonight Show. Letterman seems to be thinking back on what happened and why it happened now. In David Letterman's absence, The Late Show maintained its successful run. After Stephen Colbert took over as host, the show underwent a number of revisions in an effort to broaden its appeal. Beloved guests and long-forgotten memories keep popping up in David Letterman's final weeks hosting late night. Letterman had Howard Stern reflect on their history together, but Dave clearly wanted to leave some things in the past. After hearing rumors that Jay Leno had apparently turned down an invitation to appear on The Late Show, Stern made every effort to stir up trouble about the comedian. Leno had asked to spend his last week on The Tonight Show with Letterman, but he declined. Letterman, calm and collected as always, explained this to Stern. Let Letterman tell it. This was just the two men's way of saying goodbye in their own unique ways. A public reconciliation between Letterman and Leno occurred in 2011, putting an end to a long-running conflict that started when Leno was selected to succeed Johnny Carson as host of The Tonight Show rather than Letterman. On broadcast, Dave reconciled and announced his decision to declare a ceasefire, burying the hatchet. Their feud has come to an end, he said, because they are now brothers. On the other hand, Stern obviously thinks otherwise and has been trying to start the late-night feud all over again for a while. While working on NBC television, Stern informed Letterman that he was not communicating with Jay Leno in 2013, following his appointment as a judge on America's Got Talent. On his show, they begged him to appear, and he rejected the idea, expressing his disapproval because Leno had wronged Dave. Even though he was still deep in the woods, he was fighting the war. Stern was fighting it out in the bush, but Letterman appeared to have psychologically retired to a beach. The majority of people think that Letterman won his late-night feud. Although it took a long time for them to make up, their animosity began with a memorable incident. We need to figure out what transpired. Struggle for number one on late-night television. Johnny Carson shocked everyone in 1991 during a gathering of the NBC affiliates management at Carnegie Hall in New York City by revealing that he would quit his critically acclaimed tenure on The Tonight Show 1 year after the show's 30th season. With the show running since 1962 and under his ownership since 1980, Carson has created one of the most recognizable and lucrative television brands in the United States. Reportedly, Carson and NBC had a strained relationship despite this accomplishment. The elderly personality looked to be sending a message about his discontent with the network by publicly announcing his resignation without informing the network in advance. Some saw his surprise appearance on Late Night with David Letterman a few hours later as a symbolic handoff of leadership responsibilities, during which he had a cordial discussion. 2 weeks later, though, NBC revealed that Jay Leno, Carson's guest host since 1987, rather than David Letterman, would succeed Carson. 2 weeks after Carson announced his retirement, word got out that this decision had been simmering for some time, spearheaded by two high-ranking NBC Entertainment Division executives, President Warren Littlefield and his close associate John Agaglia, who was president of NBC Enterprises. Actually, Leno and his manager Helen Kushnick had previously inked a contract with the network at NBC's Burbank headquarters on May 16, 1991, which assured them of hosting The Tonight Show upon Carson's departure. Littlefield and Agaglia allegedly intended to fly to New York City to notify Letterman personally, which caused a 2-week delay in the announcement of Leno as Carson's replacement. The network wanted to resolve some issues with their 12:30 a.m. show, so they did this. Presenter before to releasing the information to the general public. Consider Leno's 4.6 million household ratings on the nights he replaced Carson 6 months ago. These numbers were nearly identical to the show's total viewing during that period, but the demographics of the audience were far more diverse and youthful than Carson's. Also, Letterman's show was raking in the viewers at noon. NBC retained Letterman and chose Leno as Carson's successor due to their respective income streams of $20 to $30 million each year. General Electric, the parent corporation of NBC, began airing reruns of Late Night from Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. on A&E, an American cable channel, in 1991. This was an effort to monetize the show's extensive archive of episodes. Less than a year later, in 1992, the reruns came to a stop. Letterman frequently voiced his discontent with the situation on air, and he was unaware that the syndication arrangement had been struck. The value of NBC's weekly first-run episodes, in his opinion, was weakened by the showing of reruns 5 nights a week earlier in the evening on cable. He was worried that if repeats were available earlier, people wouldn't want to stay up late to watch the first-run programs. The syndication run was shortened and not renewed until after Letterman left NBC because of his reservations. When Jay Leno was named host of The Tonight Show on CBS in 1993, Letterman moved to the network from NBC, where he had ambitions of taking over once Johnny Carson retired. Carson strongly opposed this decision since he had always considered Letterman to be his legitimate successor. Peter LaSalle, a senior vice president at CBS who had produced for both of them, claims that Letterman announced his departure in January 1993. Conan O'Brien, who had worked with Lorne Michaels on Saturday Night Live and was a writer for The Simpsons at the time, was chosen by Michaels in April to replace David Letterman immediately following The Tonight Show. O'Brien took up the Late Night moniker the same year that he began broadcasting a new show in Letterman's former time slot, September 13th. As soon as Letterman left, NBC asserted ownership of numerous beloved late-night bits. For his CBS show, Letterman swiftly adapted to these restrictions. While late-night staple Larry Bud Melman resumed his shenanigans under his real identity, Calvert DeForest, the viewer mail section remained under the moniker CBS Mailbag. Similarly, the in-house band lost its moniker as the most hazardous band in the world once they were allowed to play horns. And thus, Paul Schaefer and the CBS Orchestra took their place. Schaefer came up with the name CBS Orchestra, and CBS gave its blessing, who retained ownership of the name upon Letterman's 2015 resignation, has chosen to end his run as host of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert in May of 2026 and retire the franchise. Against a difficult late-night backdrop, they justified the choice as a solely financial one. CBS said that Colbert was irreplaceable and that the cancellation had nothing to do with the show's ratings, substance, or anything else going on at CBS's parent company, Paramount. In addition, after the late-night fight started, Dave's career became a magnet for remarkable experiences. Let's explore his most extreme experiences. David Letterman's craziest interactions. Letterman had Oprah Winfrey as a guest on his show in 1989 while he was running Late Night on NBC. Their 16-year enmity began after that performance. Winfrey told Letterman that the brutal tone of their 1989 interview made her feel so uneasy that she didn't want to repeat the experience, which led to the enmity. After Winfrey made an appearance on David Letterman's CBS Late Show in December 2005, it seemed like their dispute was over, something that Letterman, in a playful way, called the Super Bowl of Love. In February 2007, Winfrey and Letterman collaborated on a late-night promo that ran during CBS's coverage of the Super Bowl. They watched the game together on a couch in the promo. Letterman, a native Indiana resident, sported a Peyton Manning jersey for the game, while Winfrey, whose show was filmed in Chicago, wore a Brian Urlacher jersey. At New York City's Madison Square Garden, Letterman made his debut appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show on September 20th, 2007. Their second appearance was in a late-night CBS commercial 3 years later, during the Colts game against the Saints in the Super Bowl. At that moment, Winfrey was perched on a sofa adjacent to Letterman and Leno. Colts Hall of Famer and regular guest on Letterman's show Art Donovan donned the retired number 70 jersey while he was on the air. Letterman was the one who suggested this appearance. While The Late Show was recording on February 4th, Leno secretly boarded an NBC corporate plane to New York City. He met Winfrey and Letterman at a living room set they had constructed on the theater's balcony, where they had filmed their promotional video. On Oprah Winfrey's Next Chapter in January 2013, Winfrey and Letterman discussed their animosity, and Winfrey revealed that she had a horrible experience on her last appearance on Letterman's show. Despite his lack of recollection, Letterman extended an apology. While the WGA strike was in full swing in November and December of 2007, the late program was dark for 8 weeks. Worldwide Pants, Letterman's production firm, was the pioneer in reaching a separate arrangement with the WGA, enabling the revival of his show in January 2008. As a sign of his solidarity with the strikers, he stunned viewers on his first appearance back by proudly sporting a new beard. On the January 2008 show, he shaved off his beard. Letterman delivered 2 jokes on June 8th and 9th, 2009, concerning Sarah Palin's unnamed daughter, which dealt with sensitive topics. Among the jokes was the idea that MLB player Alex Rodriguez had slept with Palin's daughter. Unlike Palin's other children, Willow, who was 14 years old at the time, was in attendance at the game in New York City. In reality, though, the pregnant woman was her daughter Bristol, who was 18 years old. The joke's intended target daughter became murky as a result. In an online message, the 62-year-old male celebrity's obscene words directed at a 14-year-old kid prompted ugly laughter, which Palin characterized as something Letterman would never dare do to anyone else's daughter. Letterman reacted to the criticism on his June 10th show by explaining that the jokes were meant to be about Bristol, an 18-year-old girl whose pregnancy as an unmarried teen caused a stir during the 2008 U.S. presidential election. According to Letterman, the comments had nothing to do with Palin's daughter, who is 14 years old, and he absolutely would never joke about having sexual relations with a girl of that age. The public outrage, however, continued unabated after his remarks. In a recent statement, the National Organization for Women endorsed Palin, noting that Letterman's apology was insufficient. After the scandal gained further attention, Letterman addressed it again on his show, this time apologizing to everyone who was offended by the joke, including the governor and her family, his 2 daughters, Willow and Bristol, and taking full responsibility for his mistake. In response to accusations that he molested children, Rodriguez demanded an apology. However, Letterman failed to offer him a direct apology. An Islamist militant reportedly threatened Letterman on a site frequented by Al-Qaeda sympathizers on August 17, 2011, urging American Muslims to kill him for joking about the June 2011 drone strike in Pakistan that killed Al-Qaeda leader Ilyas Kashmiri. While claiming that officials from the State Department were investigating the threat, Letterman played down its seriousness on his August 22nd show. They were treating it with seriousness. Leno was the obvious target of their inquiry and interrogation, despite the presence of an electronic trail. The decision to have Jay Leno succeed Johnny Carson as host of The Tonight Show was made by NBC, even though Carson clearly wanted to hand the reins over to Letterman. Even after his departure from NBC, Letterman maintained a close relationship with Carson. The Late Shift, a television movie produced by HBO 3 years after Letterman's move to CBS, was based on a book by Bill Carter, a journalist for the New York Times, that chronicled the competition between Leno and Letterman to anchor The Tonight Show. Carson continued by appearing as a guest on Letterman's show on multiple occasions. On May 13, 1994, on a Los Angeles-filmed episode of The Late Show, he made his final television appearance. On the Top 10 list segment, he shocked everyone. It was revealed in early 2005 that Carson occasionally forwarded gags to Letterman, who would then incorporate them into his monologue. CBS SVP Peter Lasley, who was a producer on both shows, said that Carson thought it was great. It was common practice for Letterman to imitate Carson's distinctive golf swing after he delivered a joke. For the first show following Carson's death, he wrote all of the opening monologue gags. The fact that Carson always considered Letterman, and not Leno, to be his genuine and legitimate successor was also mentioned by Laszlo. Letterman occasionally used Carson's iconic bits in the early days of The Late Show, such as Karnak the Magnificent, starring Paul Schaefer, Stump the Band, and The Week in Review. From time to time, dropping Carson a line to politely request his blessing. Those wild antics had people talking, but they also set him up for success in the end. We should investigate the way he reached the pinnacle. After graduating from Ball State, Letterman began his career in radio talk shows on WNTS, and then worked as a weatherman and anchor for the Indianapolis television station, WLWI, which would eventually change its name to WTHR. His eccentric on-air approach brought him notoriety. For example, he once praised a tropical storm for intensifying into a hurricane and predicted hailstones the size of canned hams. In his weather reports, Letterman would occasionally include made-up city high and low temperatures. During another occasion, he playfully blamed dirty political maneuvering for a satellite image that inadvertently removed the state line between Ohio and Indiana. Along with his hosting duties at freeze-dried movies and a local children's show, he was the star of Clover Power, a Saturday morning conversation show where he discussed the work of 4 members of H. While reporting from the pit road for ABC Sports' delayed coverage of the 1971 Indianapolis 500, Letterman made his national broadcast debut. Locally, ABC was represented by WLWI in those days. His name was changed from Chris Economaki to Dave Letterman at the end of the interview, thanks to Jim McKay. Mario Andretti was interviewed by Letterman during this segment, who has recently retired from the competition. Letterman moved to Los Angeles, California, in 1975 with the support of his then-wife Michelle and a handful of his Sigma Chi fraternity buddies. He wanted to pursue a career as a comedy writer. Together with Michelle, they piled into his pickup truck and headed west. He nevertheless owned that vehicle in 2012. After he arrived in Los Angeles, he began performing stand-up comedy at the Comedy Store. His performance caught Jimmy Walker's eye. Walker recruited Letterman and a couple of other comedians to write jokes for Walker's stand-up act after hearing about them via George Miller. Steve Oedekerk, Elaine Boosler, Byron Allen, Richard Jenney, Paul Mooney, and Robert Schimmel were all members of the same squad at various points. The Starland Vocal Band Show, a summer series that Letterman was a regular on and a writer for by 1977, aired for 6 weeks. Was broadcast by CBS. Scouts from Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show were captivated by Letterman's distinctive brand of dry, sarcastic humor, and he went on to become a regular guest on Carson's show. After becoming Carson's favorite, he began making frequent guest appearances in 1978. The most significant impact on Letterman's career, according to him, came from Carson. Letterman debuted his morning comedy program on NBC in June 1980. That is hosted by David Letterman. Even at the height of his career, there was a single moment that was legendary. His pride and joy was a single show. Why was the late night show so groundbreaking? Let's find out. Into the Late Night Supercenter. New York City's RCA building, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, was the original site of late night's NBC Studio 6A. Starting on February 1st, the show ran 4 nights a week, Monday through Thursday. Beginning in 1982 and ending on June 4th, 1987. The show continued to air repeats on Mondays and only produced 4 new episodes per week until June 12th, 1987, when Friday episodes were debuted. Prior to this, NBC used to play Friday night videos at 12:30 in the morning, airing period on Saturdays, in addition to late-night repeats and specials. Shortened to 1 hour and rescheduled to 1:30 a.m., Friday night vids are back in action on the mornings of Saturdays. Starting on September 2nd, 1991, the airtime of Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show was shifted from 11:30 p.m. as of 11:35 p.m. beginning at 12:35 in the morning with Letterman. In response to a demand from NBC stations for more time to air advertisements during their popular late newscasts. Anniversary specials were a staple of late night, just like they were on The Tonight Show in the 80s and 90s. Merrill Markoe served as head writer for Late Night. Hal Gurney had extensive experience as a TV director. Jack Rollins, who managed David Letterman, served as executive producer, and a team of young writers, the majority of whom were in their early 20s, were joined by the more seasoned Jim Downey, who had worked for Saturday Night Live before, and Steve O'Donnell, who was 27 years old. Shortly after taking office, Downey succeeded Markoe as head writer. In 1983, O'Donnell succeeded her. Downey made a triumphant return to Saturday Night Live in 1984, and O'Donnell would serve as chief writer for the majority of the show's run. Chris Elliott, a young man of 21 years old, was also a part of the crew, at first serving as an assistant in production for the Stupid Pet Trick section. Rapidly rose up the ranks to become a writer and a regular featured player. The initial plan was to revive Letterman's morning program for a late-night audience that would be more receptive to his eccentric brand of humor. The show also featured a house band, which was conducted by Paul Schaefer, an NBC staff musician. They were jokingly referred to as the most hazardous band in the world in the early episodes, but that moniker was later deleted. The band didn't have a formal name for a good chunk of the show's run. Returning in 1988, the title "The World's Most Dangerous Band" stayed for the duration of the program. The crew was certain they could break free of the constraints of the traditional talk show format and set out to create a strange, offbeat, and eccentric broadcast once they noticed that NBC management weren't interested in micromanaging the show's specifics. The show Snyder's Tomorrow aired again in January 1982. After only 4 days, Larry Bud Melman made an appearance on Late Night as a tribute to Boris Karloff's Frankenstein's prologue. Then, David Letterman took the stage to perform Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, accompanied by the Peacock Girls, a group of female dancers who had previously opened the David Letterman show's finale. The first comedic section, following a brief talk, was a caustic studio tour. Bill Murray, a 31-year-old actor and comedian, made a grand entrance as the first guest, playfully accusing and joking with the presenter. He continued for 2 more hilarious segments, where he pretended to show a home video of his new pet panda from a Chinese zoo and then revealed his love of aerobics, inviting a crew member to join him in jumping jacks to Olivia Newton-John's physical. A remote part titled "The Shame of the City" served as the second comedic item. It was structured similarly to an action report from a local news outlet. Angry Letterman would tour different parts of New York City, bringing attention to various civic issues. A young comic named Steve Fessler read the script of the obscure Bela Lugosi film Bowery at midnight as the show concluded, and the second guest was Don Herbert, better known as TV's Mr. Wizard. Baseball great Hank Aaron finished his stint with Letterman on the third night. Television sportscaster Al Albert and Aaron discussed the interview's success or failure after it had concluded with a camera following him backstage. "It was strange and uncomfortable," he said. Very early on, the show's tone diverged significantly from that of The Tonight Show. Producers associated with Johnny Carson were responsible for the show's inception, because of a provision in his contract with NBC that gave him the power to decide what programs would air immediately following Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show. Carson hoped that there would be minimal resemblance between his show and Late Night. Actually, the production firm, not the network, was the primary source of the restrictions and regulations that Letterman was subject to. Ed McMahon couldn't be Letterman's sidekick, and Doc Severinson's horn section couldn't be in Paul Schaefer's band. Famous actors and actresses who had appeared on Johnny's show in the past, such as James Stewart, George Burns, and Buddy Hackett, were also informed he couldn't invite them. The fact that Late Night was shot in New York and Tonight in Hollywood helped keep guest appearances to a minimum. The producers of Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show warned Letterman explicitly not to replicate any of Carson's iconic segments, like Stump the Band and Karnak the Magnificent. It was Carson's wish that Letterman's opening monologue not include too many jokes about current events. He debuted in November 1993. The rights to syndicate Late Night with David Letterman were purchased by Entertainment Television. 5 days a week, viewers may see the network airing whole programs from various years. Following this, the replays were carried on Trio, Popular Arts Television, a joint venture between NBC and Vivendi Universal Entertainment, from 2002 until the channel went dark in 2005. The 1992 to 1993 season of Good Times Entertainment's sold programs lacked the opening and closing sequences using the series theme. Since Good Times declared bankruptcy in 2005 and its assets are now held by Gaiam, there are no current prospects for a DVD release. This typically does not disseminate entertaining material. As part of a licensing agreement between NBC and Worldwide Pants, Letterman officially opened his YouTube account in February 2022 to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Late Night's debut. The channel featured highlights from Letterman's Late Night, Earlier Morning, and Late Show programs, among others. Even though David Letterman's NBC morning show was canceled in October 1980, only 18 weeks after it began, the network management, especially NBC president Fred Silverman, still held him in high esteem. A first-run syndication business was pursuing the comic, but NBC offered him a deal: $20,000 per week, $1 million per year, a year off, and multiple guest hosting gigs on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. In May of that year, following much back and forth, NBC and Carson reached a new contract agreement. This arrangement granted Carson control over the time period immediately following The Tonight Show, among other things. As part of his one-year holding arrangement with NBC, Letterman guest hosted 22 episodes of The Tonight Show from late 1980 to the end of 1981. He also made 5 appearances as a guest on Carson's famous show while the network prepped the cast for a new project. Next, the debut of Late Night with David Letterman was announced on November 9, 1981, by NBC, Carson Productions, Letterman's new production firm, Space Age Meets Productions, now known as Worldwide Pants Incorporated, and Carson himself. In early 1982, at 12:30 a.m., this show was supposed to premiere. Duration, Monday through Thursday, with occasional Friday airings of special episodes. Every one of them aims at lads. There wasn't much late-night programming targeted at young men, so the network made an effort to appeal to them. As a result, the new show took up the noontime formerly occupied by Tom Snyder's Tomorrow Coast to Coast. When NBC first proposed moving Snyder's show back an hour, he turned them down and ended the broadcast instead. He was already upset about the modifications made to Tomorrow. On December 17, 1981, the final first-run episode of Tomorrow was broadcast.